is back.
Yeah, mic check, mic check, mic check. What is good? We are back, officially live once again. Welcome to the Kickin The Real podcast. I'm your host, Andy Diosa. If you're a first-time listener, thank you for being here. And as always, if you're a multiple-time listener, thank you for being here. I'm excited for the show as I always am because the guest list keeps rolling. We have nothing but fine invited guests to the show. And it's a perfect time because the Major League Soccer season is officially over. The playoffs are upon us. So had to bring in the big hitters to make sure we cover everything across the board with Major League Soccer and what is going to be a fun ride to MLS Cup. You've probably seen his byline at ESPN. You've seen it at The Athletic, The Guardian, MLS. You might have heard his voice if you tapped into certain games here and there. Backheeled.com, all of the above. I got my boy Joe Lowery with me. Joe, thanks for coming through the kick with me. How you feeling today, brother?
I'm good, Andy. I appreciate you having me on. First of all, second of all, are the big hitters coming later, or is there somebody coming in behind me? Or are you going to kick me off? I don't know how this is going to work. Either way, I am stoked to be here with you.
You know what's funny about that? My first episode, I had Tom Bogert on. Shout out to Tom, and he said the same thing. And I'm like, man, we said we got to set the bar high and keep it that way. So
I was for Tom. It's like, modest humility. It's like, well, no, you're going to be the guy. No, dude, I am stoked for being here. Thanks for having me. Always love chatting MLS. Love what you're doing. All that good stuff.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks for joining me. Like I mentioned, you've probably seen Joe's byline all over the place. If you're a fan of the league, a fan of soccer, and he has a lot of cool things going on. So I'm going to start this episode as I do all of them with the origin story, just so people that are listening and or watching can get a little bit of a sense of who the guest is, the background and things of that nature, and how Joe has gotten to the point of what he's doing now. So what was the origin for you getting into sports writing, into sports media?
Yeah.
Where did that success come from?
Yeah, I was a sports obsessed child, as I feel like a lot of us in this space are. Sort of always knew that my future was not going to be on the field, but off the field. I started writing about soccer specifically, right around the 2018 World Cup, kind of just before then. And the U.S., of course, didn't qualify for the 2018 World Cup in Russia. And that was a big deal. It was a big deal, I think, for a lot of outlets who had planned on making the coverage of their coverage of the U.S. men's national team sort of a focal point, trying to hop on the wave of soccer in the United States. And so George Qureshi, who was at The Athletic at the time, they had just launched their soccer vertical, and he was the editor over there. And the U.S. didn't make the playoff. The U.S. didn't make the World Cup. And George reaches out to me and asks if I want to do some tactical kind of in the weeds stuff for them. And I did. I signed a 1-month freelancer contract for them. And then I just kept writing stuff, and they kept paying me to write stuff, which is great. So George opened the door for me, and I'm super, super thankful for that. And really ever since then, it's been knocking on doors, and I started doing stuff with the Total Soccer Show. And that's been a hugely consistent thing. I love chatting with those guys, 5 days a week, basically, and started writing. And then eventually 2022, still doing work for other outlets, like you said, but started Backheeled, which is a soccer media company. We have Backheeled.com. We have the Backheeled Show as well. And we cover American soccer. We cover MLS, USL, men's, women's national teams, NWSL, all that good stuff, and a bunch of other stuff too. Trying to push the ball down the field more, trying to cover American soccer in interesting ways. I don't think there's enough American soccer. I think there's an appetite for more. I should say enough American soccer coverage. I think there's an appetite for more. We're trying to go beyond just this happened or that happened, and maybe talk a little bit about why it happened or how it happened or why you should care about that it happened. So it's been a blast. We've been around just for about 2 years now. Started in the summer or early fall of 2022. And now it's crazy that it's already 2024, but it has been a blast.
It's amazing, man. Time flies, and I do love hearing that type of stuff, because I feel like people that get into the media space always have, I feel like, a different perspective when they go into it, and they approach it in certain ways. And you mentioned tactical breakdowns versus other people kind of just giving different analysis, and there's space for all of it. And like you mentioned, there's definitely a need for more across the board for people doing cool things. So it's just awesome to hear how that starts and kind of how that blossoms into something different. When you're starting Backheeled, or when you have the idea of starting Backheeled, how was that like? Just kind of going through the motions and turning that idea into actual live thing.
Yeah, the hardest part was trying to think of the name. It took everybody in my life being extremely irritated with me that I rejected all of their name suggestions that I'd asked for. And honestly, I don't remember if it was me or if it could have been like my dad or I don't know who came up with Backheeled. I truly don't remember, because there were hundreds and hundreds of names. It probably wasn't me, because I wasn't coming up with any better ideas either. But it's difficult. Like, you go through and you build out the back end stuff, and you sort of figure out the vision for what you want it to be. And I had that vision, and you go out and we've had a really great group of people working with us sort of from the beginning, some of them, and it's sort of putting those people together and directing the editorial vision of the site. There's a lot of different things that goes into it, but honestly, it's just fun. I truly enjoy getting to both nerd out on the soccer stuff and dive in and not just do tactical stuff, but do columns. And we've broken some news over there and kind of hit all different aspects of the media landscape, but then also to try to build something more. I think there is space for more and more dedicated coverage in American soccer, like I said, and getting to brainstorm and try to implement some cool and different ideas that people aren't doing to help us all get there and to reach that goal of being able to kind of go on and read whatever you want. That's the most fun part. So it's all of those little details all wrapped into one. We probably we're building it out and planning it for the 8 months, 6 months before we finally launched in 2022, and then had been thinking about doing something like that long before then. So yeah, it's a long process with a lot of different facets to it, but I wouldn't trade it.
No, it's amazing. And the evolution is natural, right? Because you have control of creative freedom. Of course, you have a vision of where you want to go, but then you're also able to have that fun. And we just talked about it off camera. Like, as long as you're still having fun doing this, that's
totally.
Create it, enjoy it, and just keep watching, the fruits of your labor kind of blossom. And that's what it's about. And you have the right idea, man. Like, everything has been so overblown in these past few years in soccer in this country. And obviously leading up to 2026, things are like just in front of everybody now. Like, it's gaining all of that momentum, and it's cool to be able to see people create their own thing, be a part of that larger narrative, and, like you said, push the ball down the field quite literally, man.
Yeah. It's been a blast. Like I said, I wouldn't trade it. I really enjoy it. There's still things. There's so many things on my to-do list, things that I want to do more of, things that I think we should do better, that we should dive into more. But I mean, everybody that's over there with us, we got Ben Wright doing MLS stuff with me on a regular basis. Armand Kafai is diving into some more of the analysis stuff. We've got John Morrissey, who covers USL like nobody else. Had really, I think, top line NWSL coverage this year. Good women's and men's national team coverage. I'm really, really proud of the stuff that we're doing, even while knowing that there's lots and lots and lots and lots more we can do and will do and want to do. But yeah, dude, like I said, I definitely wouldn't trade it. It's been so much fun.
It's incredible, man. I love that. Please check out Backheeled if you're listening or watching. I'll make sure that all the information is tagged in like the episode description and all that fun stuff. Alongside with the writing aspect, I want to get into your work with Phoenix Rising as the analyst and kind of how that came about and what's that like?
Yeah, so this is my first season as the color analyst for Phoenix Rising's TV broadcasts. It has been so much fun. I know we just talked about Backheeled and talked about how much I'm enjoying that. As much as I love Backheeled, as far as the one singular thing that I get to do for 2 hours, once a week, you can't beat getting to do the broadcast stuff. It has been such a blast. It came about, I've been involved covering the club for a long time, for years and years now. And I stepped away a little bit when I started doing more MLS and kind of national level soccer stuff. And this year, the club decided that they wanted to bring their broadcast in-house and sort of make some of those production decisions on their own. And somebody had known me, and I have good relationships with people there. And someone kind of put me up for the analyst role, because a lot of what I do is trying to just dive even half a layer deeper. Even though I don't have that playing background, I do have the analysis background. And they liked my reel that I sent them. I've done some radio stuff in the past, and I got to work with the great Killian McClatchy, who's becoming a Valley legend out here in Arizona. When they put us together, we hadn't spent much time together before, but now we're great pals, and we've had tons of fun doing the games this year. It has been just a cool experience. I didn't expect to be on TV much this year at all. So to get to do that and to get to go out there and kind of be a part of something that is, I'm from Phoenix, like a part of this city, and to get to be a part of something bigger than myself, it's a cool feeling, man. It's a cool feeling. I think I'm done for the year, because at this point, Phoenix are 8th in the West. They're locked into that spot. They won't host a game in the playoffs. So my season is over, because we do the home games in particular out here. But I'd love to do more and more and more of it. So it's been cool.
That's awesome. There's a lot of good energy around the USL Championship. If you're watching on YouTube, I have the Rhode Island FC jersey
Phoenix
here.
kit, Rhode Island kit. This is a good little USL matchup we got.
We love it. Both teams, like Joe just mentioned, Phoenix has clinched the playoffs. Rhode Island in their inaugural season has clinched as well. So I'm super excited. The stadium that they're building that will debut next year is about a 3-minute drive from where I grew up.
Nice.
So I'm very excited to go back home for the opener, whenever that is there in Pawtucket. But it's great. And we mentioned it. Like, it's just being around the landscape in general, because people see MLS and it's one thing, but there's so much going on the other tiers of US soccer that it just kind of falls in line. And I think my favorite example has been like watching how St. Louis has kind of blossomed from like those tiers of the lower ranks to now being an MLS team and then having that historic regular season last year. Like those type of stories happen, but if you're not paying attention to different levels of the soccer system, you might not know. But there's a lot of fun stuff happening that's just like, you know, not just from the MLS level. So it's cool to kind of be a part of that, especially for you being from the area and being able to kind of work with Phoenix in that way. I'm sure it's a very gratifying on that end.
Yeah,
But
no doubt about it. No doubt about it.
We'll get into MLS. That being said, I just wanted to give background for Joe because he does a lot of great work, and definitely wanted the listeners to kind of tap in and know where he's coming from before you're like, oh, it's all this MLS knowledge coming from. But we're gonna get to the good stuff.
Well, we're all these. Who's this guy with all the takes that I disagree with? I think that might be more of it. But
all the hot takes. You're coming off of a shout out to Soccer Wise and David Goss. I was listening to the episode and you were saying you're not necessarily a big fan, or not a big fan. Not you don't love Decision Day, and I don't disagree with you because of the fact that so many teams get into the playoffs in MLS. But Decision Day delivered in the few ways that it should have. It did, and there was not many games that actually truly mattered. But then the ones that actually mattered did have a say on what happens here. So I'm gonna put up this playoff bracket for the people watching on YouTube. This is how it kind of sliced out in MLS. These are the matchups. We have wild card kicking off. It is going to be Montreal and Atlanta in the wild card, and the Whitecaps and Timbers in the wild card. And then we'll get to the rest of the playoff picture in a minute. But let's just start with the wild card matchups. And Atlanta gets in with some help elsewhere in a different game. DC United kind of watches Christian Benteke's Golden Boat season just kind of finish at that, disappointingly. A lot of things happen in those last few spots. But what do you think of that Atlanta-Montreal wild card matchup?
I think it's going to be a ton of fun for a lot of different reasons. As lukewarm as I was heading into Decision Day, I am stoked for the playoffs because I think there are lots of great matchups. That Montreal Atlanta game is Joseph Martinez City right there. It's Joseph Martinez who scored 10 non-penalty goals for Montreal this year. I think he's got 6 goals in his last 4 or 5 starts for CF Montreal. He has been huge for them in recent weeks. It's Joseph against his former team in Atlanta United. It is a fun stylistic matchup as well because of how Laurent Courtois wants to play and how he likes to build. If you go and look at the possession numbers and the passing accuracy numbers and some of the metrics that give you a good indicator for style of play, and then go watch the tape too. I'm sort of assuming that maybe some folks out there haven't seen a lot of CF Montreal this year. I don't blame you for that. If you go and watch them or look at some of those numbers, you see that Montreal is the closest team in MLS to the Columbuses, to the Miamis, to the Galaxies, to the Houstons of the world, the teams that really value the ball and want to do fun stuff with it in possession. Montreal have not been nearly as good at using the ball to create their chances and to deny the opposition chances as any of those other teams who are flawed in their own ways. Of course, maybe we'll talk about that later on. But Montreal are at least doing a lot of the same things, which leads to pretty passing sequences. For them, it leads to a lot of turnovers, and it leads to some good counters the other way, which could benefit Atlanta United. I think there's goals in that game. I think there's going to be desperation in that game. I think there's a lot of fun angles for that Eastern Conference wildcard match. I'm really excited.
Yeah, obviously Joseph, as you mentioned, is the big storyline, and it's funny because he just played them not too long ago, and kind of had that little like moment of like, I'm sorry I had to do it to you guys, but I had to do it to you guys. It seems like Montreal's season has been like 3 different parts almost from the beginning of the year to now, but how they ended the regular season and kind of just on a little bit more of a momentum going into this wild card match, I think is going to be a lot of fun. Just seeing how, like you mentioned, that translates their gameplay and their aggressiveness in certain aspects. I'm excited to see what they could do. And Atlanta has been like up and down, disappointing, but you almost have a little bit of the back of your mind where they might be able to pull something off, and then you're like, all right, good for them. But I'll probably lean Montreal in this one just because of the way things have gone. But what do you think? You're gonna make a pick here, Atlanta or Montreal on that end?
I would probably lean Montreal as well, if only because they're playing at home in this game, and I can see that might be the deciding factor. The interesting thing about Atlanta is they have picked up 4 points from their 2 games against Miami this season. They beat them once, they drew them the other time. Like, I'm intrigued, man. I'm intrigued, and there absolutely is that little part of me that thinks maybe Alexei Moranchek turns it on, even though he's been poor since he dropped an A from his club name and went from Atalanta to Atlanta. Like, maybe we'll see him turn on the Jets. He clearly has talent. Sabelo Janite is one of the better wingers in MLS. There's quality in that Atlanta team, but I'm not bold enough to pick them on the road against Montreal, even though I don't think there's a lot that separates those 2 teams.
Yeah, it's been quite a turnaround for Atlanta too. Obviously, offloading so many great players this year.
Yeah.
And what I feel like they needed to do in terms of moving forward in their vision. But like you mentioned, there is talent on that side. But maybe that game being up in Sassuolo does play a huge role in how things turn out. Now, speaking of home field, this one is interesting. Going to the Western Conference, Ohio Car. It's a great segue because the Portland Timbers will be playing against the Vancouver Whitecaps at Providence Park, despite being the lower seed, because scheduling conflicts at BC Place and whatever the case may be. So,
Yikes.
how do you feel about that wild card clash? I feel like this also has the ability to have a lot of fireworks, a lot of offense, and just I feel like two teams that might just be on a collision course to kind of just fight for the chance to play against LAFC in that round one.
Yeah, that the Caps don't get to host this game despite finishing above Portland is wild. They don't own BC Place; they're tenants there, and clearly there was either some sort of scheduling snafu when we thought, oh well, we won't be in the wildcard spots, we'll be in the top 7 or whatever it was, or BC Place just didn't care. It's a really, really bad situation for Vancouver to the point where I think it really does fully tip the scales in the favorite here over towards Portland, who might have been my pick regardless of where this game was held, because of how talented that attack is. Vancouver, to their credit, have a nice attacking unit as well in Ryan Gauld and Brian White. But man, that Timbers attacking trio of Felipe Mora, Jonathan Rodriguez, and the star Evander, they're the first trio in MLS history to have 14 plus goals apiece in a single season. They have been so dynamic. They've gone toe-to-toe with some of the better teams in the Western Conference. They are still flawed. Maxime Crepeau hasn't been amazing for them in goal this year. Defensively, they really have tightened things up as the season's gone on. They become one of the better defensive teams despite allowing 2+ goals in 10 straight games in the first third of the year. Like they really did struggle at times, and I still feel like there's some of that struggle bus in them still. But between the game shifting to Providence Park and I think the quality that's in this Portland team, the match winners that they have, I think this is going to be a Timbers win to set them up against LAFC.
Yeah, I think I agree fully on all of those points. I mean, that talent on that offense is incredible, and they could all turn it on basically whenever. And salute to Felipe Moore, who kind of, I don't want to say under the radar, because obviously you have Evander, who was MVP caliber, and Rodriguez, who came in and kind of just settled easily. But I also think about back in the beginning of the year where it's like Phil Neville was taking over and people perhaps had a little bit of like skepticism about how it was going to work out. And to your point, like there's still some of that, like, hey, man, they might end up messing something up along the lines, but they did turn it up defensively a bit. And it's a team that, I mean, we could get into this a little later about teams potentially surprising in the playoffs, but it's a team that has that ability to make that, to make a loud and bang in MLS playoffs if they do get past Vancouver, which I think they will in that wild card game. But it should be 2 fun games with obviously, 2 teams will end their season there, so it's going to be a lot to play for, and I'm sure we'll see goals because it's MLS and we always do.
You know it.
Decision day, the craziest part of decision day, Los Angeles. Man, this is a storyline that being a local here now in LA have been following closely. Crazy because the Galaxy basically were in first place of the Western Conference just about all season. Like it's a very dominant comeback season for them after the madness that was last year with the boycotts and all different things that were going on in Carson. And yet, they still had to play for something on the last day of the season. And it just happened to be the little noisy neighbors up the 110 LAFC, where this back and forth battle just will not end. It's just every time something happens, it just magnifies how much the rivalry in LA has grown between those two. So basically what happens, if you're not aware, is the Galaxy were down in Houston. They just needed to win or draw, and that would have basically secured their number 1 spot, which, like I mentioned, they were in all season. LAFC was playing at home against San Jose, and they needed to win, hope for a result in Houston for the Galaxy game, and score goals, which are all 3 very likely things. The Galaxy have not been great in Texas this season or in the past in general. Not many teams are great in Texas, honestly. LAFC was playing San Jose, who concedes a lot of goals. LAFC scores a lot of goals. So that math was definitely mathing there. And it came down to a dramatic, let's say 5-10 minutes at the end of both of those games, where Marlon comes in, a newcomer for LAFC, scores a beautiful header. The Galaxy are trailing. They get I want to say debatable penalty, but it's questionable. You could have gone both ways, but either way, they get a penalty call. Ricky Puig in the box. Gabriel Peck, if I'm not mistaken, shoots and scores that. So now it's like, okay, the scores are how they should be for the Galaxy. And people are at BMO. The game finishes in LA. People are watching on their phones, the fans. And then out of all people, Daniel Steres with a beautiful header for the Houston Dynamo. He scores a winner. That winner basically pushes the Galaxy down to second place. LAFC celebrates at BMO because they take over first place. It's just complete madness. And I don't think the funny thing about this is just like the moment is cool because it's decision day. And this might not even matter in the grand scheme of things. And honestly, looking at it now, if you're the Galaxy, you might be a little happier on the side of the bracket you ended up on in second place, maybe over first place. But it all goes down to if both of these teams do make a run and they go to the Western Conference Final, the hosting rights to that game will be now at BMO, and everybody was thinking they would have been at Dignity Health Sports Park, which is a whole different conversation. So what is your breakdown of the LA madness that happened on the season, how that worked out?
My favorite moment is the Apple broadcaster caught an LAFC fan on their phone watching the Galaxy Houston game. And when that goal from Daniel Steres, former Galaxy defender, talking about it, when that goal goes in, it's like, oh, guys, like Houston just scored. And it completely changes everything. And I love it so much. I think that point, Andy, you made about the bracket is fascinating. And I completely agree with it. I think the Galaxy in some ways got the better end of this stick just because of the teams that they're going to face. We talked about Portland. Portland have shown some real teeth against the Galaxy this year. I don't think they're going to be mad to avoid the Timbers and end up with the Rapids in that first round, or Vancouver even. I think Vancouver have it at this point more upside than Colorado because Cole Bassett's been out since I think September 21st was his last game. He's missed 4 straight games, and the Rapids have lost all 4 of those games. I don't have a great read on what his availability is going to be like for this round 1 series, but Georgi Mihailovic also goes down. He's off the field early in that game against Austin that the Rapids lost over the weekend. And he's got what the Rapids said is an ankle sprain. And I don't know how long that's going to keep him out. The Rapids are like flying into the playoffs with a broken wing and I don't know, some feathers ripped off. Like they're not doing well right now. I would very much rather take on the Rapids, who've had a great season. They've had the third largest points per game improvement in all of MLS from last year to this year, only behind the Galaxy and then the team that brought in all of Lionel Messi's friends in the last few transfer windows. Like their turnaround's been fantastic, and we had a great story about it for Backheeled earlier this year. They've done good stuff, but I'd rather take on the Rapids than either of the wildcard teams. And then you go out from there a little bit and you think about, well, LAFC, they've got either Portland or Vancouver. That's a very winnable series, but it's not like a total cakewalk. And then they've got Seattle and Houston, and they've got, LAFC have had Seattle's number, but the Sounders have the best defense in all of Major League Soccer based off goals and goals allowed. They are a good team. They have the veteran know-how sort of to navigate through some of these moments. They're not going to be overawed by the occasion, and they're motivated. And then Houston have had LAFC's lunch money, at least this season for chunks of it. LAFC do end up beating the Dynamo last year in the playoffs, but that's not an easy game either. And I don't think it's a great stylistic fit for LAFC. So, you're not thrilled if you're the Galaxy about losing that top spot. Like they care about that. That matters to them. But I don't know that it's the worst thing in the world either. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. It's just kind of crazy how it happened because you almost like overlook a lot of it. And you're just thinking of like this Western Conference final between both LA teams. It's like, oh man, it's going to be great. Well, they'll be able to play it at Dignity Health Sports Park. Where if you don't like, the other funny thing about the last El Tráfico there was like, sure, before the game, Greg Vanny was like, this game, we need to win this to prove like, yeah, that we're here, like we're the team in the West. And they, for the first 45 minutes, did not play it that way. And that's the part of, to me, about the Galaxy and about certain teams that they don't have that. They don't come out certain ways in these big games. And I believe it was Edwin Cedillo before the decision day that said like the playoffs start for us today, talking about the Houston game. They didn't necessarily play that game as it was a playoff game. And Vanny after the game was like, listen, this hurts, sure, but the next time it happens, that's our season. So like there's still that, I guess, that next growing step for them. Whereas you look at LAFC and they've played in all these finals and all these things. Like, of course, there's arguments to be had there because Portland will play a tough game against them. Seattle, as you mentioned, is going to eventually, Brian Schmetzer is going to break through and break that curse of them getting beat up by LAFC all the time. And then Houston. So it's like, it's going to be a road for them. So
yeah,
maybe the Galaxy, after a little bit of that sadness wore off, they were like, all right, this is not bad. And of course, you're spot on about the Rapids. I said it all year. Cole Bassett was probably the most underrated player in MLS. Had an incredible season, and just had his injury mixing with Georgie's ankle, like it's very tough. We'll still remember the Rapids in their brilliant Leagues Cup run, but unfortunately, it doesn't seem like there's going to be too much else there. But like things happen, man. You never know. It's going to be fascinating to see how that first round shapes up. But we'll go back to the bracket, and then we'll ask you the question of what one of these series, or maybe a few of these series, are you looking forward to the most? We have the Galaxy are playing the Rapids, RSL against the Loons, Seattle Dynamo, LAFC against the wildcard winner. And then on the East, we have the Crew against the Red Bull, FC Cincinnati against New York City, Orlando versus Charlotte, and then Inter Miami will play the Eastern wildcard winner. These are all best of 3 series. Do not forget that, because we love these beautiful rules here in MLS. But which one of these series, or maybe a few, are you looking forward to the most in that first round?
Yeah, the one that I am really drawn to, not necessarily because of the matchup, but just because of one of the teams playing in it, is Columbus Red Bulls. The Red Bulls are not a team that I think has the ceiling to go out there and win MLS Cup. It's a weird matchup because we just got it over the weekend. We could be looking at 4 straight games between those two teams, which is awkward and very unsoccer like. It is very American sports though, so I guess we got that going for us. But it's for me all about Columbus, and I'm not trying to toss Red Bulls fans out with the bathwater here. There is no chance that you all win this series. It's MLS, like all this stuff's in play. I am really realizing recently how special what we're getting to watch in Columbus is, and it is truly wild that Inter Miami's rise has coincided with Wilfred Nancy and Cucho Hernandez and some of the other great pieces in Columbus, with all of those folks being in Columbus, because if Inter Miami weren't here, Columbus would have again been the darlings of the league this year, because they really embraced that and became that last season. As the year wore on, they make that run all the way to MLS Cup. They're playing incredible soccer under Wilfred Nancy, who's worked miracles in Montreal before, getting them to finish second in the Eastern Conference. Columbus go out there and pay a fee to get Nancy over like you would for a player. And he immediately had success building, not immediately, there were some early struggles, but really after a few minor growing pains, they become one of the real power players in Major League Soccer last season, win a trophy, come into this season, make that incredible run to the CONCACAF Champions Cup final where they end up losing to Pachuca. But they take down Tigres, they take down Monterrey, they win the League's Cup final, and then they go all the way through and are the second best team in the Eastern Conference behind the weirdest, but also the most top-heavy, starriest MLS team we've ever seen in Inter Miami. Like, Wilfred Nancy is not going to be here forever. He's made it very clear that he, and understandably so, not in a I want to get out of Ohio kind of way, but in a like I need to go and do the next thing in my career. He's made it clear that he wants to go to Europe and will coach at a higher level. Cucho Hernandez is not long for Major League Soccer. You take those two pieces out of Columbus, the most aesthetically pleasing and one of the best teams we've ever seen in MLS. I don't think they're the best, but one of the best teams we've ever seen in MLS, like, crumbles really, really fast. And not that the crew couldn't succession plan really well. Maybe they go out there and get Laurent Courtois back from Montreal, given that he was there before. I don't know what the path towards life after Nancy and Cucho looks like for Columbus, but I do know that that path is coming up real quick, or at least it certainly seems that way. And I personally, as someone who watches way too much MLS, and a lot of it is not what I want it to be, Columbus are everything that I want it to be, and more than that. So any chance I get to watch the crew, I take it, and I will be watching all of them through the playoffs, all of this stuff through the playoffs. But that's the series that I'm drawn to, just because I know that they're not long for this current version of themselves. I'm gonna miss them when they're gone.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, they've been incredible. Just I think, and it starts like we mentioned about ranks. Like even when they work that they've been doing in MLS Next Pro, that kind of translated it, that player pathway and grabbing some of those players and integrating them into the first team. Like even that has been incredible. And then being able to kind of navigate these tournaments and the way that they've gone about it with Wilfred Nancy has just been amazing. It's almost a shame that they went out in the final that way in CONCACAF, because you could be talking about a whole different, I guess, trajectory. It maybe comparing this cup too with the penalties. Like there's so many things that little things happen. But to that point, like Cucho Hernandez has been amazing. And if it's not for, Messi probably winning MVP and maybe Tata winning Coach of the Year, like you're talking about an easy layup for Cucho MVP and Wilfred Nancy for Coach of the Year. So it's almost like an aspect of it too that makes me feel like I don't think people have, but maybe they are getting a little overlooked, right? Because like everything is like, all right, it's Miami's or that's it. Like they're gonna win it or not. But like they could also very much so be on the like, hey man, let's remind everybody that we did just win MLS last year. Like we did just win Leagues Cup. Like we're still a very good team, probably the best in terms of playing soccer in the league at the moment. And, like you mentioned, there's just another team that happens to have some world stars, the greatest player to ever play the game. So it's definitely intriguing to watch the crew. I 100% agree with you. Anytime that you get the chance to watch them because they play a very fun brand of soccer. And I think they showed in last year's MLS Cup how not nervous they are in certain moments. And they, instead of looking at LAFC and saying, hey, we're going to play a certain way, they're like, no, we're going to play the way we do. And basically broke down one of the better, I would say, tactically defensive teams in the league when you come think about Steve Cherundolo and how locked in he's had defenders over the years, and kind of just made them look silly with their game plan. And I don't think they did anything that would have surprised LAFC in that game. They just do it really well, and they broke them down the way they do basically everything they play in MLS. So I agree with that. I'm very excited for, we just talked about it a little bit, Seattle and Houston. mostly for the chance of like two teams that are pretty talented at end of the season. I think in a good form. I mean, the Sounders seem to do this every year, where there's a part of the season in the beginning of the season where we're like, hey, this team is probably not that good anymore, and then we're like, oh yeah, there they go, they're one of the best teams in the West again. And it's two teams that have been to the Western Conference Final in the past few years. Like they've gotten there. They both have played LAFC in the Western Conference Finals in the past. So I think they're in their mindset. They know like they have what it takes to make a run in the West. And obviously it starts in round one, but it's not going to be an easy path because they're going to have to probably run into LAFC in that next run if that does happen. But in terms of talent, in terms of what they've done throughout the season, I think that's going to be a fun one because we could be talking about a contender in that series in a West that, you know, a lot of the headlines were dominated by LA this year. But if there's two teams that I think could play spoiler, as we saw Houston do it on decision day, I think it's the Sounders and the Dynamo for sure.
I like that series a lot. I mean, I think all these series are going to be fun. I'll take us a different way in the Western Conference. I am sneaky interested in RSL Minnesota. So RSL have had a fascinating season in general. They start out hot. Like they're at the beginning of the year for the first maybe third half of the season, there was this pack of 6 teams. So there were the 3 in the East, 3 in the West. So it was Miami, it was Columbus, it was Cincinnati, then it was the 2 LA teams, and it was RSL. Great work on my part, putting my hand off screen. That's a pro move. Didn't bother the podcast listeners, though. I got you all. It was 3 and 3. And then over the course of the year, RSL, new structure under Pablo Mastroeni. They completely shifted out his old assistant coaching staff over the offseason, brought in new managers, guys with first team and like actual head coach experience to work under Mastroeni, and they reworked their game model. We also did a story on this for Backheeled, if you couldn't tell. They changed a whole bunch of stuff in Salt Lake, and Carlos Gomez breaks out, and Chicho Arango looks like an MVP. I mean, man, he was so good. You know this so well. Like he was unbelievable to start this season. And then over the course of the year, Cincinnati fall out for Cincinnati reasons, and I don't know if we'll talk about them later or not. Injuries is sort of the TLDR and transfer issues on that front. But for RSL, Carlos Gomez has an offer slid across Kurt Schmidt's desk in RSL's front office for 8 figures from Rennes over in Liga, and that's why they signed Carlos Gomez from Colombia in the first place, is to go and give him this next opportunity and to make some cash along the way. And that's exactly what happened. And it was an offer they couldn't refuse. Carlos Gomez, as we stand today on October 21st, 2024, before the playoffs have started, is still RSL's second leading scorer, and he's still their second leading assister. He's not played for this team since July. So they have really struggled. And since they made some moves in the transfer market, Diogo Goncalves comes in. They add in Mark Zook on the right side. They add some pieces in the summer window. Pablo Mastroeni has not used the same combination of 4 primary attackers in any of those games since the transfer window was closed. It's been 9 games for RSL, and they've done something different in the attack personnel-wise every single game. I'm fascinated. We know Chicho can dominate games. We saw him do it in bits and pieces last season. He did it for a huge chunk of this season. He's been quiet. We know what Diego Luna can do when he's at his best, when he's motivated. We know there's talent in this RSL team. I want to know if they can turn it on against a Minnesota team that's been crazy hot. Like since the end of the summer transfer window, while we're on that topic, Minnesota United have been top 3 in all of MLS for points per game, and they lead all of MLS according to American Soccer Analysis in expected points per game. They've been red hot, and I want to see what these two teams look like against each other. I think they drew not too long ago in the regular season. I don't think there's a lot between these two teams. RSL have the advantage of being at home. There's talent. They both chopped and changed a whole bunch in the summer transfer window, 2 of the most active teams in MLS. I think this is going to be a fascinating stylistic matchup. I think it's going to be a really interesting matchup in terms of personnel. If I had to pick like a sneaky under the radar first round matchup, this would probably be my pick.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that, man. It's going to be, I think it's one of those matchups that maybe a lot of people from the broader lens is not really paying attention to that much, but it's a lot going on there. Like you mentioned, that the summer transfer window really shaped both of those teams in the opposite directions. Shout out to Chicho Arango, former Kickin The Real podcast.
Yeah, baby.
As well. But I think, at some point in the beginning of the season, I was like, he might be on like a Carlos Vela 2019 pace. Like he was scoring at will, and then things just changed for whatever reason. Obviously, Andres Gomez not being there. You know, you sell when you have to sell. Like, but it's like, man, I almost wish there was a alternate universe where he stays this season and see how RSL, because people were really considering this team as a contender. Not that they're not anymore, but things have changed so drastically there. And then you mentioned Minnesota's coming in, finishing the season in pretty good form, and I think they have also play for too. Motivationally, I think it's going to be a really fun matchup. And bring it back to the Crew, man. This is what I mean. Like when the Crew sold Lucas Elarayan, it was almost like, what are they doing? And then they just bounced and like it wasn't even like they got rid of their best player. And it's like these are the type of things that franchises do, that good coaching does. Like, not to say that Pablo is not that and RSL is not that, but there's always like that succession plan. It's like, sure, we can sell a good player at a moment that may not be ideal, but how do we bounce back from that? So that is kind of like RSL's challenge right now, and seeing how that may work out. I am very excited for that series as well. And I'll bounce to the East for one. I think it's just probably I think on a lot of people's radar is Orlando Charlotte, man, because two teams that in their seasons have had also like ups and downs, but Charlotte, what they've been able to do in this last stretch, Patrick Agyemang has been amazing, and I think they've kind of figured out what works best for them instead of kind of just like trying to let me try this here. They kind of stuck to a system, whereas Orlando's the opposite. Orlando's like, maybe we'll start this player, maybe we'll bring Muriel off the bench. Disappointing this year, but still kind of had a little bit of a run in the past month where it's like we see his talent and see that he could do certain things. Duncan McGuire, who's not even supposed to be there, is there and contributing at a high level. There's talent on both sides. I believe Orlando is the more talented team, but I still think that that's a complete toss-up in between those opponents. And I feel like that's going to be, to me, I think the best series of the first round.
I think it might be the most tightly contested series, the first round. You know what I mean? Where I don't know. I sort of agree that on paper, Orlando maybe have a little bit more talent. Charlotte have that quality as well. In you think about Agyemang, who's been so good. You think about their defensive quality, and you think about how good Christian Kalina has been, saving more goals above expected than anybody in MLS. It seems like he was my goalkeeper of the year vote. It seems like a lot of other people are in that same boat as well. Like Orlando are at their best, I think, when they can play in transition, where they can sit back in that 4-4-2 mid block, provide a little bit of higher pressure, letting Gulo really pester opposing defenders from that left winger spot that he started every game at for Oscar Pereira this year. They're dangerous in transition with Martin Ojeda pulling some of those strings. I think the same is true of Charlotte. So I think a lot of these games, both because of seeding and because of how Pereira sets up, will look like Orlando having a bit more of the ball and maybe really taking on that protagonist role a little bit more than Charlotte. But man, I could see this going either way. I've really enjoyed watching Charlotte this year more than I thought I would under Dean Smith. They have quality. They have some flexibility ahead of next season. There's a lot of interesting things coming for the Charlotte FC team. It's their best regular season finish ever this year. They've got a real shot to win a playoff series. I'm really intrigued about what's going to happen here because I think it could go either way.
Yeah, 100% agree. And it's going to be one of those series that I think, well, it's 3 games. So I think that's the one that goes the distance in terms of how the teams kind of react. And it's always interesting because if you're the home team, obviously in game 1, there's a kind of like a must-win feel of that game because you don't want to lose that and then go on the road, especially to a place like Charlotte, who has had great home field advantage in that stadium. And I could very much see Charlotte winning that first game in Orlando. So, like you said, it could be a toss-up either direction, but I'm excited for that one the most, I think. Is all the matchups will be interesting in their own way, but there's something with those two teams and how the season has played out that is going to be a lot of fun for sure.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, really, maybe the only matchup we haven't talked about of the ones that we know for sure. We talked about Galaxy Colorado a little bit already, sort of dismissing Colorado, and I'm not all the way ready to do that because the Galaxy can combust. We know that, but I think that one seems more lopsided now, given where the Rapids are. The one that we haven't talked about a ton is Cincinnati NYCFC, which I think is another really even matchup. I don't think there's a lot separating these two teams. Cincinnati have and will have the best player on the field in Lucho Acosta, who finishes tied for 3rd in the league in non-penalty goal contributions this year. His numbers were better this year on a per 90-minute basis than they were last year when he won MVP. That's just a testament to how good so many other guys were at having Messi for, his version of a full season, having, Cucho, we talked about earlier, Suarez, run through the list of guys. Since he will have the best player on the field, but NYCFC, Alonso Martinez has been a revelation for them, scoring goals up top. I think he's got 10 in his last 13 games. They have the quality. I still don't know if they have the absolute star power to go and make a run all the way. This is an extreme example, but I think it's an illustrative one. Thinking about how Miami can play a really wretched game of soccer and Lionel Messi can play 2 passes and the whole game changes. And all of a sudden Miami have 3 points. I don't think NYCFC have that player. For as much as I like Santi Rodriguez, for as fun as Maxi Morales has been coming back to NYCFC and getting back on the field, I'm a little bit worried about NYCFC, but I'm also worried about Cincy because they don't have the defensive depth and quality that they did to start the year with some injuries there. They took big swings in the summer transfer window and missed on all of them, and ended up with Nico Gioacchini on loan from Como for the rest of the calendar year. He's not been a difference maker for them. Both teams are flawed. Both teams are fun, and I think both teams have pretty high floors in the grand scheme of things. I'm really interested in that matchup because I think both teams could make a little bit of a run, or maybe they fight each other to the death in this series, and whoever wins loses as soon as possible in the next round. Anything's on the table.
No, most definitely. And to that example that you gave is actually to the Cincy side. It's like they could not be playing a good game, but Lucho or Luca Orishano could come through in a moment and with a brilliant combination or a brilliant pass or a brilliant shot and kind of change things. And on the New York side, like it's a very young team, but I feel like sometimes those young teams they enter playoffs and enter these situations where it's like we don't have much to lose. Like, hey, let's just go at it. Maybe nobody really expected us to be in this position to begin with, and now we're here against the Cincy team who, like you mentioned, in the beginning of the season was being talked about in that caliber with the top teams and coming off of a good last year and having the MVP and have really dropped off from that. So I could see that that being an interesting one as well. I guess game 2 will not be played at Citi Field because the Mets are now out of the MLB postseason. I don't know exactly what's going on there. I don't think NYCFC assumed that the Yankees would get this far in the postseason because they haven't in such a long time. But here we are anyway. But one of those games will be played somewhere that is not Yankee Stadium, and we'll see how that works out.
Never short on interesting hosting scenarios in MLS. That's for sure.
It's a glorious league, man. If you had to pick one team, perhaps that you could say would make a surprise run in the playoffs, who would it be? You don't have to necessarily say exactly why or for what crazy reasons, but you just have to pick one team and say, hey, this might be the one that makes a surprise run, because we know we have the teams that we expect to see make a run, Columbus,
sure,
Miami, and things like that. But there's always a nice little Cinderella story that pops up.
Yeah, I'll go Minnesota. I don't feel great about it. I think this year's MLS is more top heavy than in maybe any other year I can think of. I think it's going to be difficult for a non-top 2 seed to really do that. But if I'm going to pick one, it is Minnesota. Like a month ago, maybe a little more than a month ago, Minnesota weren't even a guaranteed playoff team. Forget finishing out of the wild card spots. Like they pushed themselves all the way up to 6. They've been very, very good after the summer transfer window. Jefferson Diaz is a super fun player as an outside center back for Eric Ramsey. Joaquin Pereira is starting to find himself a little bit in the half spaces. I'm not a huge fan of his game, but he does make this team better, even though I don't think he's a star for them. And then Kelvin Yeboah looks like a very, very good, if not great, number 9 in Major League Soccer. They added 3 super useful pieces in the summer transfer window to go with Robin Lod, who's been one of the better playmakers in all of MLS and has made Minnesota United fans very quickly forget about Emmanuel Reynoso, which is not easy to do. He has not been as good as Reynoso on the field, but he has been very, very good. Tani Oluwaseyi's added a ton of value to this team. Hassani Dotson looks like one of the top 3rd number 8s in Major League Soccer, like top 10 guys at his position in the league out of the 30-ish teams. They have quality in every line of the field. I think this Minnesota United team has a real shot to get past RSL in the first round, traveling on the road. And then you've got the Galaxy and Colorado. And I know I talked about that being the easier path for the Galaxy against LAFC, but I still have this sinking feeling in my heart that the Galaxy could just completely crumble on any given day. And Minnesota United might blink and they'll be in the conference finals. And they're, anything can happen at that point, right? So I think the Loons have the potential. At the same time, they've not done great against basically all of the good teams they played since the summer window. They lost to Seattle, they lost to Cincy, and they drew with RSL. All of their wins have not exactly been banner wins. So they padded their stats a little bit, but I think the quality is there. The eye test, I really like watching them. I think they play good soccer. I'm intrigued about what Eric Ramsey's team can do.
Yeah, it's a good shout. Mine is going to be Orlando, and we just kind of talked about it a bit. I think the team is talented enough in terms of personnel that they have on the field. They haven't put it together this year in a lot of ways, but I have a little bit of confidence in Oscar Pareja figuring that out. And I think maybe that best of 3 series does kind of benefit them in a way of like, let's see what we have, especially going forward to the next round. I think there was a stretch of the season where they really showed when they're locked in how good they could be. And that's the Orlando City team I'm hoping shows up in the postseason. Like I said, it hasn't been super consistent, but there is enough there to make a run. And the only reason I really want to give him a shout is because if there's somebody that's played Miami tough in MLS, it's been Orlando. And if they have to play Miami, listen, we say Miami is going to go through and whatnot, but like they have had no worries about just getting in Messi's face and annoying them. And we saw it from the very beginning in that Leagues Cup matchup. So I don't know. I don't think it will happen, but we'll go with that. With that being said, congratulations to Charlotte and RSL for your first round one.
Hey, you're welcome. We did it for you. The reverse jinx never fails.
Never fails. And we'll end off with the conversation we were avoiding for the first 45 minutes, because it is possible to talk about MLS and not always talk about Miami, of course, but we'll end off with Miami and Lionel Messi and everything they have going on, because the conversation, it's almost funny coming into the season where like people like us that are very, let's say sickos as they've been termed, are really tapped into the league. We almost wanted to believe, or maybe are so tapped in and made ourselves believe that like, sure, they'll be good. They won't be that good. Like there's going to be other teams that may challenge. Like the preseason thing maybe threw a few of us off. And I'm like, Luis Suarez can't even walk, never mind 5 minutes. And he scored 17 goals or whatever with his eyes closed. Like it's incredible because they win the Supporters Shield. They set the points record. And even in that game, I was joking around because I am from New England, so I support the Revs. But like, even in that game, I'm like, oh, the Revs are up 2-0. Like this might
Totally.
be, and like it collapsed within like 5 minutes. And then you're like, oh, Messi's gonna come off the bench and do something absurd, and
that's what happens.
He did the more absurd thing than just the regular absurd thing, which it's just like every time there's nothing else to really say about it. I don't understand why and how a lot of us did trick ourselves to believe what we may have believed, but here they are, top of the league, expected to kind of run through its MLS Cup or bust, of course. Messi will probably win MVP. Coach of the year, it could be a toss-up between Tata and Nancy, as we talked about earlier, but I think Tata probably ends up winning. Either way, regardless of a newcomer, it should probably be Gabriel Peck, but could be Luis Suarez. They're there in every category. They're there for a reason. It takes Messi one touch sometimes, as we saw in that New England game, to get things done, and that was a very, very good touch. But what do you see from Miami? Is it really as simple as like, hey, man, like it's just if they're all on the field, they're probably going to win unless they're into Columbus, and then maybe there's an issue there. But I don't know, man. It's like it's going to be hard to stop that freight train.
Well, Miami's record against Columbus in the regular season was really nice as well. I think it is as simple as when Messi and Suarez and Alba and Busquets and some of the other really nice pieces they have, but especially Messi and Suarez, when those guys are on the field, like MLS is already structured, I think in a lot of ways to incentivize teams to have the more money allocated towards attackers than to defenders, right? When you only have a few spots for designated players, generally you're going to use those on attacking players because they're more expensive and you can get more bang for your buck there, and guys who can really change the game. You talk to front office folks around MLS. I was talking with somebody recently. They were mentioning we wanted to go get attackers, specifically guys who had speed, because we recognize that there's space in this league. Like teams don't always take care of the ball. The quality of the average attacker is so much higher than the quality of the average defender in MLS. Like that is, I think, a function of how the league is built and how teams have built their rosters. If that's a foundational truth, when the average attacker on your team is like Luis Suarez, because one of them's Messi, one of them's Suarez, and one of them's Diego Gomez or Robert Taylor or Julian Gressel, whatever. Like if Suarez is the middle guy of that, you're going to be in really, really good shape. Like Luis Suarez toyed with the Revs defense. Now, to be fair to the Revs, they also toyed with Toto Aviles and David Martinez over the weekend, and Drake Callender as well. It was a rare poor game from Drake Callender on that second goal, at least. Like the center backs for Miami, you could play Yakety Sax in the background of how those guys were trying to deal with the Revs transition attacks. But when Miami have their best players on the field, it looks like they can carve through just about anybody. And that's exactly what they did this year, setting the points record. Andy, let me ask you this question, because I've been thinking about this more. Rather than why will Miami win this? Because I think it's pretty clear to see why Miami will or why they could win it. In your mind, what's the thing that's going to stop them from winning it? Like we know that their center backs are leaky. We know that Busquets is past it defensively at this point. But we also know that it seems like whenever they allow 2 goals like they did, they can then go score 6. Like what's the thing? How does this go wrong from Miami in your mind? Have you thought about that at all?
Yeah, and that's the reason why I gave Orlando a shout. To me, the way you have to play Miami is, and this is coming from somebody who's watched not only Messi in club, but watched Argentina and World Cup qualifiers, and they're always the better team on the field, right? They have an abundance of talent, but the way you play that team is annoy them. You have to be physical with them. You have to put them on the ground. You have to kick them. You have to just do the dirty stuff. And people might say, oh, well, don't piss off Messi. Well, like, don't give him a little bit of space either. So, like, battles, right? If you're going to give him, like, one touch, he chips the ball over the head of the defender. And it's to that point. It's like him and Jordy have this muscle memory where it's like, it doesn't matter. Like, it takes 1 second and they're like, automatically they know where the ball's going, where spots they're in. So it's not so much like how do you even game plan against them, because the tape has been out there for years. Watch Barcelona tapes, watch Miami tapes. Like, I think coaches know, like, you have to pick your poison. But to me, is you have to make it a, no pun intended, a messy game. You have to ruffle them dudes up, because that's the only time that I've seen teams actually get into a fair playing ground with them, where now they're starting to get frustrated. And you even talk about the Nashville Leafs Cup last year, where it's like the longer it goes, you start feeling that pressure. And now you're like, okay, maybe now they're trying to do too much. Maybe now Messi's trying to take on an extra dribble when he should have made a pass. Maybe now the role players are not getting to the spots that they need to be in. I think that's the approach you have to have. I don't say you necessarily change your game plan if you're any team in the East, because good luck trying to go toe for toe with any of those players. But like, you don't necessarily just sit back and give them the respect that they deserve. I mean, you give Suarez any space, he's going to score from outside the box. He's going to score from in the box. And you have players like Benjamin Kravatsky, who that could be efficient if he's on his game, and Messi and whoever else is locked in and passing the ball. So there's no format for playing this team like in MLS. But to me, it's like, don't give them the respect that they deserve. As bad as that sounds, like, you got to go in there and be like, yo, we're gonna play this game physically and hope for the best. Because if like I said, if you give these guys if you give them time, if you give them momentum, things like that, like, it's even they get a free kick at the edge of the box and you're already thinking like, all right, they're about to score. It's like no other team, I think, evokes those emotions on any part of the pitch, where, like you mentioned, defensively they could give up a few goals, but you turn around and they've already scored 4, and you're like, oh well, like, if that's going to be the case, that's the format, then good luck.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I sort of, the way I think about Miami is that, along the lines of what you were saying, you have to be fully committed to whatever you're doing, right? I think to win games against most teams in MLS, not all, there's probably a few others that fall into Miami's bucket here in a general sense, but to win games against most teams in MLS, you don't have to be perfect. You have to be good. You don't have to be great. Like, you can be sloppy on the ball. You can be a little half-hearted in how you move it around in possession. You can be a little slow to get back into your defensive shape. No, if you're going to play against Miami, and we saw Nashville, I love that you brought that up, in Leagues Cup last year, do a pretty good job of this at times. Like, you got to be committed. Like, you got to be, if you're going to high press, you got to high press and, like, be nailing your pressing triggers. You got to be nailing how you're closing down players in your zonal or man-oriented or hybrid kind of pressing system. If you're going to sit deep, you have to be sharp and active and engaged and communicative all the way across the board, all 10 players on the outfield. Like, that has to happen. You got to pick a lane one way or the other when you're playing this Miami team, and fully commit to doing whatever it is that you're going to do well. And the problem is when you don't have players as good as Miami's players, you're going to make mistakes. Everybody's going to make mistakes in these games. They're just more apt to take advantage of those mistakes. So it's not easy to do, but I don't know, man. I think that's a really great answer. It's easier to say, of course, obviously, though, than it is to do.
No, most definitely. And even in that Leagues Cup, I believe it was Dallas that they went to penalties with as well.
Yep.
Like, Miami had the benefit of going into penalty kicks in that tournament because of the way it was structured. But there were some teams that played them straight up and were like, yo, we're going to go blow for blow. And, like, we're going to make this a game where you're not just going to be comfortable. And that's what it is. Just kind of get them out of that comfort zone a little bit. And there's also another part of crazy rules and things of MLS, like that international break in November might have a lot of effect on how things play out. Like,
sure,
not to say that somebody gets injured or somebody plays, like, you just never know how that breaks out. And for Miami, that might have more of a say than any other team in MLS because of the players they have. Suarez obviously is not going to be going with Uruguay, so that's a benefit to them. But just seeing if Messi plays with Argentina and how much he does, and, like, they're in first place in South America, so they could mess around a little bit. But there's still something to be said about how that pans out. But yeah, I mean, like, to me, it's, you look at talent, you look at coaching, like, you expect it to a crash course for Miami Columbus. And if there's one team that could do it, it would be Columbus. And we talked glowingly today and all season about how great Wilfried Nancy has been. There's no doubt in my mind that he, in the back of his mind, is also thinking of, like, how do I approach this game with Miami if I do get to this? And it's a one-off at that point. It's not a game where you're like, right, oh, like, it's a one-off. It's a win or lose. You know the stakes are going to be there. I don't think it's impossible, but it's going to be a very hard task for anybody. Now, when you get to, if they do get to MLS Cup, the fact that they'll be at home obviously plays a big role into it. But I'm looking at the teams in the West, and I'm like, is it going to be like a let's go 4 for 4 and see what happens? Like, you score 4 goals, I score 4 goals, and see which one of our just say it's Miami and the Galaxy for the hell of it. Like, it's almost like the same blueprint, right? Like, we might give up 3 goals, but we could score 5 at the same time. So
yeah, I'm grabbing my popcorn for that game. Like that, I think so much of this year has been Miami are the Miamiest Miami. The Galaxy are like Miami Light. And then Portland, for some reason, I've always thought of in the same bucket this year as the Galaxy, where they're like Miami Lights 2.0. They're all these tiers of teams that are much more attack heavy than they are defense heavy. And that, I mean, if we got that Miami Galaxy matchup, that would be just so good. So good.
Wildly chaotic, as MLS always is.
Yes, sir.
Joe, I appreciate you for coming through, man. It's been a pleasure just chopping it up. We could do this for forever, and there's always a lot to talk about. So thanks for joining the show. Anything else you want to mention in the MLS landscape and USL, anything you're doing, or if not, let the people know where they can follow you and find your work, man.
No, I feel like you let me be entirely self-indulgent for the first 10 minutes of this show. So no, I mean, people can follow me on social media. They can follow me on Twitter at Joe C. Lowery, but I think we covered everything and then some. This was great. I really enjoy this. Love the chat. Love the coverage. Thanks for having me on, Andy. This was awesome.
Yes, sir, man. Thank you for joining. Like I said, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see the USL Championship jerseys on full display. If you're listening to audio, check out the YouTube while you're at it too. But Joe, thanks. Make sure you check out Backheeled and enjoy MLS Cup playoffs, man. It'll be fun. The storylines are always endless in this league. And thank you for tapping into Kickin The Real. Catch you next time. Peace.